Imagine, like a hero who succeeds in their ultimate quest.
Right.
They win the final battle, and then they just intentionally walk directly into a burning house to die alongside the villain.
Yeah, no parade, no grand celebration.
Exactly. No happily ever after at all. Just this absolute guaranteed destruction that they face without even a blink.
It's intense.
It really is. And today we are stripping away that shiny Hollywood polish of, modern heroism, and we're looking straight at the raw, unfiltered DNA of epic storytelling. We're jumping right into a deep dive on the Norse worldview.
And I think it's important to state up front that this is a fundamentally alien way of looking at the universe compared to how we operate today. I mean, it's dark, it's highly fatalistic, and the rules governing human behavior in these stories are, well, they're incredibly rigid.
Right. And to figure out those rules, we're using excerpts from Edith Hamilton's classic work, Mythology. Specifically, we're focusing on her analysis of two major tales, which are the story of Signy and the story of Sigurd. Our mission today is to extract what Hamilton calls the true Norse character and the Norse point of view.
Yeah, and it really helps to know exactly where Hamilton is pulling these stories from because the source completely dictates the tone. She deliberately avoids the later, highly romanticized German adaptations.
Like Wagner's operas. Right.
Exactly, like Richard Wagner. If you want the pure, unfiltered psychological bleakness of these myths, you have to go older. So, for Signy's story, Hamilton uses the Volsunga saga, which is a Norse prose narrative, but for Sigurd's tragic romance, she goes straight back to the Elder Edda.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why does the distinction between a prose saga and, the poems of the Elder Edda actually matter for someone trying to understand these characters?
Well, because the Elder Edda gives us that poetic fatalism in its absolute oldest surviving form. It wasn't written to entertain modern sensibilities or, to present a clean moral lesson. These poems were cultural cornerstones for people living in a really harsh, unforgiving environment.
Where survival was rare anyway.
Right, and violent death was incredibly common. The mythology reflects that reality, so the older the source, the less the characters care about being good in our modern sense, and the more they care about just fulfilling their destiny.
Which is actually the perfect lens for looking at our first subject, Signy. I mean, most of you probably remember the brutal setup of her story from when you read it. Signy is married off to a man who immediately betrays her family.
In the worst way possible.
Literally the worst. He murders her father, Volsung, and then he chains her brothers outside at night, right, for wolves to devour, just one by one.
It's horrific.
It is. But Signy manages to save the last surviving brother, Sigmund. And they take this intense vow of revenge. Signy realizes Sigmund needs a pure-blooded helper to pull the revenge off. So, and this is where it gets wild, she disguises herself, sleeps with her own brother for 3 nights without him knowing it's her, and sends him the resulting son, Sinfjotli, once the boy is grown.
And we tend to gloss over the daily reality of that plan. Like, for the years it took that boy to grow into a warrior capable of revenge, Signy is still living in the hall of her husband.
Oh, well, yeah.
She is literally sharing a life with the man who fed her brothers to the wild animals.
See, that is the part I find completely baffling. Like, she is basically a sleeper agent spy, sitting across from him at the breakfast table, having his children, while meticulously plotting his horrific death.
Yeah, for years.
And yet, the source material frames her as a hero. But wait, I have to push back here. She's actually killing her own half-Norse children to achieve this, right? Because when her brother and her pure-blooded son finally come to burn the husband's house down, her other children die in that fire.
That's right.
Doesn't that violate the very concept of family loyalty that she is supposedly sacrificing everything for?
What's fascinating here is how the Norse actually categorized that loyalty. To really understand Signy, you have to completely detach from our individualized Western morality. You have to understand the Norse hierarchy of blood.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, in this worldview, your paternal bloodline, so your original kin, is absolute. An offense against your blood requires vengeance, period. The children she had with her husband, they belong to his bloodline, not hers.
Wait, really? So they were basically just casualties of a war between two bloodlines, even though she gave birth to them herself?
Precisely. She subdues every natural human instinct, and I mean including her own motherhood, to serve that one burning desire for familial vengeance. It's this iron will that prioritizes the honor of her father's house over the biological reality of her own offspring.
Wow. Which brings us to the fire. Sigmund and Sinfjotli trap the husband in his dwelling and set it ablaze. Signy comes out, gives them her ultimate blessing, tells them they have gloriously avenged the dead.
And then she turns around.
and walks straight back into the burning house to die alongside the husband she just destroyed. Like, if she achieved her goal, why not just walk away and live?
Because she recognizes the duality of her duty. Her blood loyalty demanded she destroy her husband to avenge her father, but her societal duty, her sworn oath of marriage, demanded she stand by her husband.
Oh, so she's trapped by the rules.
Exactly. In the Norse framework, you cannot simply break an oath and walk away clean, even if the person you swore it to is a literal monster. She fulfilled the first duty by orchestrating his death, and she fulfilled the second by sharing his doom.
Total annihilation was the only way out.
Right. The only possible resolution for her honor was total annihilation.
Hamilton sums this up beautifully, actually. She writes, Clytemnestra would fade beside her if there had been a Norse Aeschylus to write her story. I mean, Clytemnestra murdered her husband in Greek myth, but she wanted to rule afterward.
She wanted the power.
Yeah, but Signy didn't want to survive the vengeance. The vengeance was the entire reason for her existence.
And that complete disregard for one's own survival in the face of destiny, that is the defining Norse characteristic. You don't fight to live, you fight to die properly.
Man, that is bleak.
Huh.
So if Signy shows us that Norse heroism requires destroying yourself for your family, our next subject, Sigurd, asks an even darker question, I think. What happens when your heroism is weaponized against you by the very people you swore to protect?
Yeah, and Sigurd is Signy's nephew, the son of Sigmund. His story shifts us away from that cold, calculated vengeance and into a grand, unavoidable tragedy involving the Valkyrie Brynhild.
Let's look at Brynhild's situation for a second. The source material tells us she is a Valkyrie who has disobeyed Odin, the All-Father. As punishment, he puts her into a deep sleep surrounded by a cosmic ring of fire, decreeing that only a man who knows no fear can wake her.
And we should probably clarify what being a Valkyrie actually means in this context, because it explains her entire motivation later on.
Yeah, what is the literal translation again?
Chooser of the slain. They were martial spirits who decided which warriors died in battle, so Odin could build an army for the end of the world. Brynhild's crime was that she defied fate. She struck down a warrior Odin had promised victory to.
So she messed with destiny.
Exactly. So her punishment is to be brought down to the mortal realm, stripped of her divine autonomy, and made to wait for a master.
But she negotiates one condition, right? She demands that whoever wakes her must be absolutely fearless. And this is where Sigurd enters. I have to say, the imagery in the Elder Edda here is just spectacular. Sigurd isn't just riding through a campfire. This is a starry, mythic wall of flames.
Yeah, it's a terrifying barrier.
And he plunges his horse straight through, proving his absolute valor, and wakes Brynhild. Because he meets her ultimate standard of truth and bravery, she joyfully pledges herself to you. It's like the perfect mythic romance.
It really is. And then almost immediately, he leaves her there.
Which has always frustrated me. I mean, reading the summary, he braves the cosmic fire, gets the girl, and then just casually rides off. Why doesn't he stay?
Because of the Norns. In Norse mythology, the Norns are the weavers of destiny. They dictate the fate of gods and men alike.
So he literally doesn't have a choice.
Right. Sigurd cannot stay in an isolated paradise with Brynhild because his destiny is out in the world. He is bound by fate to ride toward his doom. Staying in the ring of fire would be a refusal of his heroic destiny.
Wow. Okay, so he rides to the home of a powerful family, the Gikungs. And he makes a critical error here. He swears a blood oath of brotherhood with their king, Gunnar. They are now spiritually bound to protect one another.
Which is a huge deal.
Massive.
Yeah.
But Gunnar's mother, Grimhild, watches all of this. She knows Sigurd is the greatest warrior alive, and she wants that power permanently tethered to her family. She wants Sigurd to marry her daughter, Gudrun. So, and this is the part that gets me. She gives Sigurd a magic potion that completely wipes his memory of Brynhild.
Yeah, Grimhild is playing high-stakes political chess, using magic as her primary weapon.
See, I really struggle with the magic potion element here. To a modern reader, it just feels like a cheap narrative device. If the hero is chemically forced to forget his true love, doesn't that strip away his agency? It feels like the writers used a cheat code to manufacture the drama.
I get why you'd say that. But if we connect this to the bigger picture of how the Norse viewed the cosmos, we see that magic in these myths isn't a superpower you wield to fix problems.
It's not.
No, it's a structural flaw in the universe that fate exploits to tear heroes down. The potion isn't a cheat code. It is the physical manifestation of his unavoidable doom.
Oh, I see.
Remember, no one escapes their fate. The potion demonstrates that even the strongest, most fearless man on Earth is utterly helpless against the mechanisms of destiny.
So magic is basically just the universe enforcing its own tragic script.
Mm.
And man, that script gets remarkably cruel. Because Sigurd forgets Brynhild, he marries Gudrun. But Grimhild isn't done, is she?
Not at all.
She wants Brynhild for her son, Gunnar. The problem is, Gunnar is a coward. He physically cannot ride his horse through the ring of fire to claim her.
So they use shape-shifting magic. Grimhild makes Sigurd look exactly like Gunnar. And Sigurd, disguised as the cowardly king, rides through that starry wall of fire a second time to win Brynhild.
It's just so tragic. He is performing the ultimate heroic act for a woman he doesn't even remember he loves, just to hand her over to a man who fundamentally doesn't deserve her.
Exactly.
And to honor his oath of brotherhood to Gunnar, Sigurd spends 3 nights in Brynhild's bed, but he places his drawn sword between them. He never touches her. Then they switch shapes back. Brynhild marries the real Gunnar, fully believing that Sigurd, her first love, abandoned her, and that Gunnar was the fearless hero who braved the flames.
It creates an incredibly volatile dynamic. You have a Valkyrie, a being whose entire existence is predicated on truth, valor, and the absolute measure of a warrior's worth.
Trapped in a total lie.
Exactly. Trapped in a marriage built entirely on deception and cowardice.
And the truth is revealed in the most mundane way possible. It's just a petty argument between the 2 wives, Brynhild and Gudrun. Gudrun finally snaps and tells Brynhild everything. She reveals it was Sigurd who rode through the fire the second time, not Gunnar.
Imagine the psychological collapse Brynhild experiences in that moment. Her entire reality is shattered. She realizes the man she loved was part of the trick, and she is bound to a man who lacks the very courage she demanded from the universe.
So she plots her revenge. And she weaponizes Gunnar's own honor against him. She goes to Gunnar and claims that Sigurd actually broke his oath during those 3 nights. She lies and says Sigurd didn't keep the sword between them, that he slept with her, and she delivers this brutal ultimatum: kill Sigurd, or I leave you.
Notice how she forces Gunnar into an impossible paradox there.
Yeah, he's totally stuck.
If he does nothing, he loses his wife, his pride, and accepts that his sworn brother violated his marriage. But if he kills Sigurd, he breaks his sacred blood oath of brotherhood, which is the ultimate sin.
So Gunnar finds a cowardly loophole. He refuses to strike the blow himself because of the oath. Instead, he manipulates his younger brother, who never swore the oath, to sneak into Sigurd's room and murder him in his sleep. And the scene ends with Gudrun, Sigurd's innocent wife, waking up completely drenched in her murdered husband's blood.
This cascading tragedy is the direct result of everyone trying to navigate the rigid rules of their world. Oaths, magic, honor. They don't protect these characters, they trap them.
The immediate aftermath of this murder is chilling. Gudrun screams in horror over Sigurd's body, and Brynhild, who's listening from her own quarters, laughs. The source material notes she laughed only once, with all her heart.
But the victory is entirely hollow, isn't it?
Completely hollow. Because almost immediately after laughing, Brynhild confesses the truth to Gunnar. She admits she lied about the sword. She confirms Sigurd was completely faithful to his oath.
She just needed to restore the truth.
Right. Having secured her revenge and restored the truth, she kills herself, demanding to be burned on the same funeral pyre as Sigurd. She leaves behind this devastating assessment of human existence, saying, "Ever with grief and all too long are men and women born in the world."
She chooses death over a compromised life. But, while Brynhild finds her escape in the flames, the true psychological weight of this story really falls on Gudrun. She is the one left behind to process the wreckage.
And Gudrun's reaction is arguably the most profound part of Hamilton's source material. The text tells us Gudrun is sitting beside Sigurd's mangled body, but she isn't screaming anymore. She is completely silent.
She's just shut down.
Yeah, she cannot speak, she cannot weep. Her heart is described as being so hard by the hero's body.
It's a state of profound shock. The emotional overload is so massive that her psychological defenses have completely shut down, and the surrounding community immediately recognizes how dangerous this is.
Because they know she needs to cry.
Exactly. They know that if she doesn't find a way to externalize this grief, to cry, the pressure will literally destroy her from the inside.
So the women of the community gather around her to try and break the paralysis. They attempt this sort of ancient communal therapy. One by one, they step forward and share stories of their own bitterest pain, hoping to unlock her sorrow.
The assumption being that shared trauma creates a bridge, right? Like, if she hears that others have survived unimaginable loss, perhaps she will feel safe enough to mourn her own.
And the stories are agonizing. One woman steps up and says she lost her husband, her daughters, her sisters, and her brothers, basically her entire family wiped out, and yet she still lives. But Gudrun doesn't shed a single tear.
Nothing happens.
Nothing. Another woman details losing her husband and all 7 of her sons in battle. She had to wash and dress all 8 corpses with her own hands, completely alone. But again, the refrain repeats. Yet for her grief, Gudrun could not weep. So hard was her heart.
The insight here is startlingly modern, honestly. Intellectualizing grief doesn't work. Knowing logically that other people suffer doesn't lessen the acute agony of your own loss. Those stories just bounce right off Gudrun's frozen heart.
Which leads to the climax of the scene. A woman who is described as wiser than the rest realizes that words are useless. She steps forward and physically lifts the burial shroud covering Sigurd's body.
This part is so visceral.
It really is. She takes his head, which is heavy, his hair is clotted with blood, his bright eyes are now dulled by death, and she lays it directly onto Gudrun's knees.
She forces an unmediated physical confrontation with the reality of the corpse.
Yeah, she tells Gudrun to look at him, to press her lips to his, as if he were still living. She forces Gudrun to look straight into the face of death. And only then, only when she feels the weight of him and sees the blood, does the paralysis break. Gudrun bows her head, and her tears run down like drops of rain.
It is a profound acknowledgement of how trauma is processed. You cannot bypass the horror through empathy or logic. You have to touch the blood. You have to stare into the unseeing eyes. You have to physically accept the permanence of the loss before the healing mechanism of grief can even begin to function.
So what does this all mean? We've looked at Signy, orchestrating the death of her own children to fulfill a blood vow, and then willingly burning to death. We have seen Sigurd ride through mythic fire, bound by fatalistic magic, only to be murdered in his bed.
And Brynhild demanding absolute valor and dying when she's denied it.
Right, and Gudrun nearly shattering from frozen grief. When we pull all of these threads together, what is the core lesson of the Norse worldview?
Hamilton synthesizes this perfectly. The overarching thesis of these myths is as stark as the landscape they came from. Basically, man is born to sorrow as the sparks fly upward. Suffering is not an aberration. It is the baseline of existence.
It just guarantees.
Completely. The Norns have already woven your doom, and you cannot escape it. But, and this is the critical distinction here, while you cannot control your fate, you have absolute control over your character. The only solution to the problem of a tragic life is to meet it with unwavering courage.
There is a moment early in the saga that perfectly encapsulates this, actually. Before the betrayals and the magic potions, Sigurd meets a wise man and asks for a prophecy of his life. And the wise man doesn't offer him false hope.
He doesn't sugarcoat it.
Not at all. He tells Sigurd straight out, "A day of doom shall come upon thee, a day of wrath and a day of anguish."
The disaster is guaranteed, but listen to what the wise man says next. He tells Sigurd, "But ever remember, ruler of men, that fortune lies in the hero's life, and a nobler man shall never live beneath the sun than Sigurd."
So the ultimate praise in this culture isn't that you achieved a peaceful life, or that you defeated all your enemies and retired comfortably. The highest praise is simply that a nobler man will never live, even though your destruction is already written in stone. It is entirely about how you carry yourself on the inevitable march to the end.
Exactly. The outcome is fixed by fate. The heroism is defined by your defiance of that fate through sheer force of character.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating paradox to consider as we close out today. Look at our modern world. We spend massive amounts of energy, money, and time trying to optimize our lives to avoid pain. We want safety, we want comfort, we want the neat, tidy ending where the bad guy is locked up and nobody gets hurt.
We want the Hollywood ending.
We do. But consider the alternative perspective we've explored today. If the Norse were right, if anguish is an absolute guarantee for everyone, if the sparks will always fly upward, does our modern desperation to avoid suffering actually leave us weaker? Are we so busy trying to dodge the flames that we've completely forgotten how to ride through the fire?